Hey guys, tonight we dive deep into a world where the desert's harshness gives way to secret pockets of lush calm. Ancient Egyptian gardens designed for meditation. Imagine stepping through a stone archway, dust still clinging to your sandals, and suddenly, you're enveloped by the cool shade of date palms, the sweet fragrance of lotus flowers, and the soft murmur of water gently trickling nearby. You probably won't survive this journey without feeling the urge to stretch out on some carved stone bench, soak in the serenity, and maybe nod off, because honestly, ancient Egypt's gardens were like nature's original chill-out zones. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, why not drop your location and local time in the comments? I love seeing when and where you're tuning in, whether it's 3 a.m. in Tokyo or a sleepy afternoon in Buenos Aires. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start with the Nile, the grand architect behind every green thing in Egypt. Its annual floods washed rich silt over the land, creating fertile soil pockets amid otherwise dusty plains. Without this miraculous river, those verdant gardens would be nothing but desert mirages. Early Egyptians were quick to notice that places nourished by the Nile's overflow weren't just good for growing food, but felt different. Calmer, somehow. The soft rustle of papyrus reeds, the gentle sway of blue lotus blossoms, and the ever-present buzz of dragonflies created an atmosphere perfectly suited for quiet contemplation. The earliest gardens weren't the sprawling, manicured estates you might picture. Instead, they were modest plots near homes or temples, carefully tended patches where fragrant herbs, flowers, and shade trees gathered. Historians still argue whether these spaces were purely functional, grown for food and medicine, or if their calming layout was intentionally crafted for mental rest and spiritual connection. What's clear is that these green heavens offered a sharp contrast to the relentless sun and arid winds outside. You might chuckle at the idea that the first gardeners probably wrestled with unexpected guests, like curious crocodiles lurking nearby or even the ever-present threat of hungry desert rodents. Yet these challenges didn't stop them. In fact, some fringe historians suggest that garden boundaries were as much about keeping out pests as they were about creating sacred spaces. A kind of ancient keep out sign with a spiritual twist. The Nile's rhythm dictated not only agriculture, but also how these early gardens thrived. Floodwaters came and went like clockwork, meaning gardens had to be designed with a patience and harmony that echoed natural cycles. This patience may be why meditation found a natural home here, waiting for the waters to recede, for plants to bloom, and for the slow turning of days created a perfect backdrop for inner stillness. Picture yourself now stepping carefully between low stone walls, the ground soft with mud from the last flood, surrounded by the scent of freshly cut papyrus stalks and lotus blooms. You feel the sun's warmth softened by early morning mist rising from the river. This sensory landscape, a mixture of water, earth, and life, was where ancient Egyptians first discovered that gardens could be more than just practical spaces. They could be sanctuaries for the soul. These humble beginnings laid the foundation for centuries of garden design evolving to become places of meditation and spiritual renewal. You're walking at the start of a path that will twist through sacred symbolism, fragrant rituals, and royal retreats, each layer revealing how deeply intertwined nature and the human spirit were in this ancient land. Remember this feeling, the contrast between the Nile's life-giving floods and the surrounding desert's dryness, because it echoes through every garden story to come. You're about to learn how something as simple as a patch of green could transform into a doorway to peace. Centuries before meditation apps and noise, cancelling headphones were even a twinkle in humanity's eye. You're standing now at the heart of those ancient gardens, surrounded by the plants that weren't just decoration. They were the silent protagonists of meditation itself. The Egyptians didn't just pick any greenery. They chose sacred plants imbued with powerful meanings, each leaf and petal whispering spiritual secrets to those who knew how to listen. Take the lotus flower, for instance. You see it rising from murky water, its petals unfolding with the morning sun. This isn't just a pretty aquatic bloom, it's a cosmic symbol of rebirth, purity, and spiritual awakening. Ancient Egyptians believed that the lotus represented the sun itself, blooming from the primordial waters of creation. You probably won't be surprised to learn that the lotus shows up everywhere in temple art, royal headdresses, and, of course, right in their meditation gardens. Historians still argue whether the lotus's role was purely symbolic or if its scent and presence actually enhanced meditative states. Either way, it's hard to deny that sitting in a garden filled with blooming lotus flowers feels like entering a sacred dream. Then there's papyrus, the humble reed that gave the Egyptians their earliest writing material, but also much more. You might picture papyrus as just a plant, but it was a kind of spiritual powerhouse. Growing abundantly along the Nile banks, papyrus was associated with life and fertility. Its feathery green crowns whispered with the breeze, creating a soothing soundscape perfect for quiet reflection. Some fringe researchers even suggest that the rustling of papyrus was deliberately encouraged in gardens to stimulate meditative focus, kind of like an ancient white noise machine. And let's not forget frankincense and myrrh. You can almost smell their smoky, resinous aroma burning gently in the background of these gardens. These precious resins were traded from far-off lands and used in incense rituals designed to purify the air and the mind. You might imagine frankincense as just a fancy perfume for the elite, but in reality, it was a key player in creating a sensory environment that helped the mind settle into meditation. You breathe it in, and it's as if the garden itself exhales calm. Interestingly, some historians debate the extent to which these plants were deliberately cultivated for spiritual reasons versus their practical uses. Food, medicine, or trade goods. It's a lively scholarly argument, were gardens sacred sanctuaries or just multifunctional green spaces? You meanwhile get to enjoy both possibilities. You probably didn't expect that even a plant like the sycamore fig, often overshadowed by its flashier cousins, had a starring role. Revered as a symbol of protection and nourishment, its broad leaves offered shade while its fruits fed birds and humans alike. Imagine sitting under a sycamore's canopy during a meditation session, the dappled sunlight playing across your closed eyelids, while the occasional bird call punctuates the stillness. There's also a quirky bit of trivia here. Ancient gardeners believed some plants could trap bad spirits or negative energy, so you might find thorny bushes planted not just as physical barriers, but as metaphysical protection. Kind of like a natural alarm system, but with more mysticism and less ding-ding. As you stroll through these gardens, you can almost hear the soft hum of ancient rituals, offerings of fresh lotus petals, the careful lighting of incense burners, and perhaps the whispered prayers of those seeking peace. These plants were not just passive decor, they were active participants in the quest for tranquility. The presence of these sacred plants created a multisensory environment, sight, smell, sound, even touch, that grounded meditation practices in the natural world. You sense that this wasn't about escaping nature but merging with it, finding a rhythm that echoed the Nile's eternal flow. So, the next time you're surrounded by greenery, consider how the Egyptians were pioneers in understanding the deep link between plants and the mind. Their gardens weren't just pretty places, they were living temples, each leaf a brushstroke in the grand painting of spiritual calm. You step deeper into the garden's design, where every stone, pathway, and pool isn't just laid out by chance, but carefully crafted to echo the universe's grand order. Ancient Egyptian gardens were puzzles of geometry and symbolism, where sacred numbers and shapes created spaces that invited your mind to wander and settle simultaneously. Right before you, the garden's layout unfolds in neat rectangles and squares, divided by straight paths lined with date palms or papyrus stalks. This rigid geometry might feel a bit stiff by today's wild, let it grow naturally, garden standards, but for the Egyptians, order was everything. The world itself, they believed, was built on mat, meaning, balance, truth, and cosmic harmony, and their gardens were miniature versions of that perfect order. Walking along a straight canal, you realize that water channels weren't just practical irrigation, but mirrors of the Nile's sacred flow, guiding your gaze and your thoughts along a calm, meditative route. You might think it's all too neat, too symmetrical, but that symmetry was meant to soothe the restless mind. Historians still argue whether the strict use of right angles and parallel lines was inspired by religious beliefs or simply an effective engineering choice. Either way, the result was a garden that felt like stepping into a calm, balanced world. Notice too the number of plants and stones often follow numerological patterns, groups of 3, 4s, and 7s. You might smile to learn that these numbers had mystical significance, 3 for completeness, 4 for the cardinal directions, and 7 as a sacred number linked to the gods. Some fringe thinkers even claim the garden layout was a giant, earthly mandala, an ancient map of the cosmos laid out in living form. You can't help but feel a bit like a celestial pilgrim walking these paths. High walls surrounding the garden add another layer of meaning. These walls don't just block the desert winds and keep out pesky neighbors. They create a sacred boundary separating the ordered sanctuary from chaotic outside world. As you walk along the enclosed garden, you can't see beyond the walls. Your world contracts to this small, perfect rectangle where everything makes sense. It's a physical and mental invitation to focus inward. You stumble upon a shallow pool, its water perfectly still except for a single lotus floating quietly on the surface. Pools like this were often placed at garden centers, reflecting the sky and the surrounding greenery. The mirror-like surface was a meditative tool itself, encouraging reflection, both literal and figurative. Imagine gazing into that water, watching your own face blur into lotus petals and sky, losing the busy noise of daily life. The garden paths often ended in small altars or shaded pavilions, places designed for rest or ritual. You can picture a quiet priest or noble quietly contemplating, surrounded by fragrant incense and sacred symbols. The geometry of the garden subtly guided footsteps toward these spiritual focal points. And then there's the curious question of whether these gardens were designed for public display or intimate meditation. Some historians propose that the layout was as much a political statement, showing control over nature and cosmos, as it was a spiritual sanctuary. Your footsteps might echo in halls built to impress as much as to soothe. Others insist that the precision and enclosure created a genuine meditative haven, a place where rulers and commoners alike could find calm. Quirky tidbit: some gardens included carefully placed benches positioned exactly where the morning sun hit at specific angles during solstices. This hints at an ancient garden calendar design, linking time, nature, and meditation. You could call it the original Instagram-worthy sunrise spot, only far more spiritual and way less selfie-driven. As you continue, you start to realize that every geometric line and sacred number work together to create a rhythm. This rhythm wasn't just visual, it echoed the cyclical rhythms of the Nile, the sun, and the cosmos, helping meditators feel connected to a larger, harmonious universe. So, when you next find yourself wandering a garden, whether manicured or wild, remember the ancient Egyptian obsession with order and symbolism. Their gardens were less about random beauty and more about weaving the world's sacred geometry into a peaceful, meditative refuge. You pause now by the gentle sound of water, a lifeline threading through the garden's heart. Water in ancient Egyptian gardens wasn't just for quenching thirst or watering plants. It was the very essence of meditation, a living, flowing symbol of life and calm that invited your senses to slow down. Picture the garden's canals and pools, their surfaces catching glimmers of sunlight, reflecting the sky and swaying palms. These water features weren't haphazard. They were carefully designed to enhance the atmosphere of peace and contemplation. The soft, repetitive splash of fountains created a soothing soundtrack, much like modern meditation apps, but with actual water instead of digital rain sounds. Imagine sitting beside one of these pools, letting your thoughts ripple gently away like the water's surface. You might think these water systems were just for practical irrigation, but no, water was sacred, the primeval element from which the world emerged. The Nile itself was seen as a divine gift, and its life-giving flow echoed in every garden stream and basin. Historians still argue whether the water features were primarily symbolic or served more practical cooling and irrigation purposes, but either way, they deeply shaped the garden's ambience. Some fringe historians suggest that the movement of water in these gardens was even choreographed to mimic the river's ebb and flow, creating a subtle rhythm that encouraged meditators to sync their breathing and heartbeat with nature's pulse. Imagine that, ancient Egyptians mastering the art of mindful breathing with the help of carefully guided streams. Way ahead of the yoga gurus we know today. You notice that water channels often crisscrossed the garden in neat lines, separating different plant beds and creating small islands of greenery. These tiny islands became mini sanctuaries within the larger garden, places where you could retreat for solitude or focused meditation. The contrast between solid earth and flowing water invited a gentle balance between stability and movement that your mind could rest in. Then there were the small fountains, sometimes carved into stone lions' heads or lotus blossoms, from which water would drip or gently pour. The visual and auditory cues of moving water served as a constant reminder of renewal and purity. You might smile at the thought that these fountains doubled as early mood enhancers, tricking your brain into relaxing without any fancy apps or calming teas. Interestingly, some scholars debate how widespread water features actually were. While royal and temple gardens boasted elaborate pools and canals, common folks' gardens likely relied on simpler water storage and irrigation methods. This raises questions about who had access to these ideal meditative environments, and how meditation itself may have been a luxury of the elite. Also, consider the subtle cooling effect water brought to these gardens in the blistering Egyptian heat. The evaporation from pools and canals softened the air, creating pockets of cooler, moister atmosphere, perfect for long, comfortable meditation sessions. This natural air conditioning wasn't just a convenience. It was part of the sensory experience that made the gardens feel like oases of calm. You might not have guessed that water was sometimes used in ritual purification before meditation or prayer. Washing hands or feet in garden pools symbolized cleansing the body and mind, preparing you to enter a state of focused stillness. This ritual echoed through Egyptian culture, reinforcing water's spiritual significance. As you trace the edge of a water basin, you catch a glimpse of fish darting beneath the surface. Fish weren't just aquatic decoration. They symbolized fertility and life's abundance. Some fringe theories even propose that watching fish swim slowly was a meditative practice itself, an early version of fish tanks designed for mental well-being. The gentle soundscape, the cool misty air, the reflections, all combine into a sensory harmony that invites your mind to soften, to become less rigid, much like the flowing water itself. In these watery heavens, meditation wasn't just mental. It was an embodied experience, a dance of senses and spirit. So, next time you hear the soothing sound of water, remember that ancient Egyptian gardens used this simple element to create a profound sense of peace, long before spy music playlists or meditation bells. You continue your slow walk through the garden, and now your feet find themselves on the soft earth, near a shaded pavilion where statues and carved columns rise gently into the sky. These man-made features weren't just ornamental. They anchored the garden in the spiritual world, turning natural beauty into a sacred stage for meditation. The Egyptians loved their symbols, statues of gods, carved columns, and wall reliefs depicting scenes of nature and divine beings. In their gardens, these symbols became silent companions to your meditation, reminders that you were part of a larger, sacred story. You might find a statue of Hathor, goddess of joy and music, or Osiris, god of the afterlife, watching over the peaceful space. Their presence wasn't just decorative, but intended to inspire a sense of protection and spiritual connection. These garden sculptures often featured animals, lions, falcons, or even crocodiles, which carried deep meanings. For example, lions symbolized power and protection, while falcons connected meditators to the sky god Horus. You might smile at the thought that these creatures, frozen in stone or painted on columns, were the ancient world's version of spirit animals, guiding your meditation like a mystical playlist. Historians still debate how much these statues and carvings were meant to be literal spiritual aids versus symbols of royal power and prestige. Were these gardens personal sanctuaries or showcases for rulers' divine status? Probably a bit of both, as you might expect in ancient Egypt. You notice how these sculptural elements weren't randomly scattered, but placed thoughtfully, near water basins, along pathways, or within quiet alcoves, creating focal points where your mind could rest or shift focus during meditation. Imagine pausing beside a serene statue, letting its silent gaze calm your thoughts as you breathe in the scent of lotus and frankincense. Then there's the architecture itself, the pavilions and colonnades. Often open air, but shaded by palm fronds or reed mats, these spaces were designed for comfort and contemplation. You can almost feel the cool shade contrasting with the warm sun outside, the gentle rustling of leaves mixing with the faint scent of incense. Quirky fact, some scholars speculate that the columns, with their papyrus or lotus capitals, symbolized the eternal Nile flood, reinforcing the garden's themes of renewal and life. So sitting under a lotus column pavilion was like resting in the arms of the universe itself. Also fascinating is how the Egyptians combined natural and artificial sounds. Statues weren't just visual, they could produce water from spouts, while carved reliefs might amplify the sound of water or wind. This blending of art and environment created a multi-layered sensory experience for meditators, enveloping them in a cocoon of calm, You might chuckle to imagine these ancient gardens as proto-theme parks, where every sight, smell, and sound was carefully scripted for maximum spiritual effect. But unlike today's noisy attractions, these were subtle, slow experiences designed to quiet the mind rather than excite it. Historians continue to debate the extent to which these garden features were accessible to the general populace, versus reserved for priests and royalty. Your wandering thoughts drift to whether a common Egyptian could find this kind of sanctuary, or if it was a privilege of the elite. You also notice that many statues show signs of wear and repair, suggesting these gardens were used regularly, not just staged for show. People came here to find peace, to meditate on life and death, to connect with the gods through quiet presence. So, as you rest beside a weathered statue of Sekhmet, lioness goddess of healing and protection, you feel a gentle invitation. This garden is a bridge between worlds, natural and divine, body and spirit, where your meditation finds shape in stone and breath in the rustling leaves. You wander now into a shaded corner of the garden, where the scent of flowering plants lingers in the air, soft and sweet. Ancient Egyptian gardens were lush tapestries of flowers, herbs, and fruit trees, carefully chosen not just for their beauty, but for their calming and healing properties. A living pharmacy and aromatherapy, all rolled into one. Imagine the air heavy with the fragrance of jasmine, lilies, and lotus blossoms, each plant picked because it calmed the mind or purified the soul. These scents wafted gently, creating a natural incense that invited your senses to relax. You might think of modern aromatherapy diffusers, but these gardens had the real deal: living, breathing, fragrant plants. The Egyptians had a deep botanical knowledge, using flowers and herbs both in medicine and in spiritual rituals. For instance, the blue lotus flower wasn't just admired for its delicate beauty, it was associated with rebirth and was thought to have mild psychoactive properties that could enhance meditation or religious trance. Some fringe researchers suggest these plants were an ancient form of natural mind expansion, helping meditators access altered states of consciousness. Imagine that, a bit like the original chill pill served fresh from the garden. The plant choices were deliberate. Sweet, smelling herbs like mint and coriander might line the pathways, their aromas easing tension as you walked. Fragrant trees like sycamore fig provided both shade and a gentle rustle that sounded like nature's own lullaby. Historians still argue whether the gardens served primarily a ceremonial function, or were everyday retreats for relaxation and healing, but either way, the sensory experience was rich and intentional. The garden beds themselves were carefully arranged, often raised to help with irrigation and to separate different species. You notice that some plants were grown in small clay pots or stone basins, portable pieces of green that could be moved around for maximum scent or shade. This gave the gardeners flexibility to design the experience, shifting plants as seasons and moods changed. A quirky detail you might enjoy: ancient Egyptians sometimes planted their gardens to bloom in cycles, ensuring there was always some fragrance and color to engage the senses year-round. It's like they curated a natural playlist of blooms that played softly all year, providing continuous sensory comfort. You also catch sight of potted herbs that had dual purposes. Some were used to flavor food, while others were believed to ward off evil spirits or bad dreams. For example, rosemary and thyme weren't just kitchen staples, but also spiritual protectors. You can almost imagine these gardens as places of both physical and mental detox. Watering the plants wasn't a chore but a ritual. Water carried from the Nile, enriched with silt, was believed to bring vitality and divine blessing to the greenery. Some scholars suggest that the act of tending these plants was itself a form of meditation, a slow, deliberate practice connecting caretaker and garden in quiet harmony. You might smile at the thought of the garden as an ancient multisensory spa, a place where sight, smell, touch, and even taste intertwine to soothe the restless mind. It was a space designed to slow you down, to pull you gently from the noise of life into the gentle rhythms of nature. And just as you begin to feel the calming effects of the scents and greenery, you notice bees buzzing lazily around the flowers. These little workers weren't just incidental. They were part of the garden's ecosystem, pollinating and ensuring the plants flourished. Some fringe theories propose that the Egyptians saw bees as symbols of the soul or messengers between worlds, adding a mystical buzz to the garden's atmosphere. As you breathe in deeply, the scents blend into a soft symphony of calm, wrapping around your mind and inviting it to rest. The ancient Egyptian garden wasn't just a place to look at. It was a space to be in, a sensory sanctuary where every plant played a part in the slow, peaceful meditation of the soul. You step deeper into the garden and feel the crunch of carefully laid gravel underfoot, the earth giving way to smooth stone pathways guiding your steps with gentle purpose. These walkways weren't just practical, they were an integral part of the garden's meditative design, inviting you to slow down, focus, and wander thoughtfully through the sacred space. Imagine the contrast between the warmth of the sunlit stones and the cool shade dappled beneath the trees. The paths were laid out in patterns, sometimes straight and formal, other times winding and serpentine. Each route carefully planned to shape your movement and mindset. Walking these paths was a kind of meditation in motion, where every step became an opportunity to connect with the earth and the divine. You might think it odd to pay so much attention to walkways, but for the ancient Egyptians, the journey was just as important as the destination. The garden paths framed views of pools, sculptures, and flowering plants, encouraging mindful observation. Some historians argue these layouts reflected cosmic order, echoing the Egyptian love of Ma'at, the concept of balance and harmony. A quirky detail: some garden paths were paved with limestone slabs engraved with symbols or prayers, creating a tactile connection to spirituality beneath your feet. It's as if each step you took was a whispered blessing, a physical rhythm sensing your body and mind. You may also notice that many paths led to secluded niches or small seating areas, inviting you to pause and reflect. These quiet corners were like secret rooms in the garden's living cathedral, spaces for private meditation or prayer away from the busier parts of the estate. The materials used for pathways varied depending on the garden's owner and location. Royal gardens boasted finely dressed stone, while simpler gardens might use packed earth or gravel. This variance influenced how your feet experienced the walk: firm and smooth underfoot or softly yielding, each texture shaping your connection to the garden. Historians still debate whether the layout of these paths was influenced by religious symbolism, practical irrigation needs, or simple aesthetics, or some mysterious mix of all three. It's a question that adds to the garden's layered mystery, like trying to read an ancient poem, where every line holds multiple meanings. Sometimes, along the paths, you'd find small piles of smooth river stones or clusters of brightly colored pebbles. These were placed not just for decoration, but as visual markers, guiding your eye and encouraging a kind of wandering meditation, like following a trail of breadcrumbs to peacefulness. You might smile at the thought that these stones and pathways acted as ancient mood setters, a low-key version of a Zen garden's raked gravel. They invited you to focus on simple details: the feel of your shoes against stone, the sound of your steps, the gentle rustle of leaves, pulling your mind away from daily worries and into the present moment. And here's a little known tidbit. Some scholars suggest the pathways were designed to align with celestial bodies, so walking the garden could be a way to mirror the movements of stars and planets, connecting your meditation with cosmic rhythms. A walk in the garden, then, might have been a journey not only across Earth but across the universe. As you follow the path, you feel the garden subtly guiding you. Every step a mindful invitation, every turn a chance to notice something new. The walkways aren't just routes, they're meditative journeys, winding threads that weave together the garden's beauty, symbolism, and peaceful intent into a living tapestry you move through with calm and purpose. You arrive now at a small pond, its surface mirror still except for occasional ripples from a passing breeze or a gliding bird. Water was the heart of every ancient Egyptian garden, a symbol of life, renewal, and the sacred flood of the Nile itself. Here, the pond's quiet presence draws you in, inviting your mind to flow gently, like the water, into a calm meditative state. Water features in these gardens were never accidental. They were carefully engineered to bring a sense of peace and refreshment. You can almost hear the faint trickle of water spilling from small stone spouts or carved lion heads, the sound soft enough to soothe yet lively enough to keep your senses engaged. It's as if the garden breathed with you, the gentle splash matching the rhythm of your own slow breath. Historically, the Nile's annual flooding was the pulse of Egypt, renewing soil and spirit alike. Garden ponds and channels echoed this life, giving flood on a miniature scale, creating a microcosm of the natural world's endless cycles. Some gardens featured elaborate waterworks, with channels flowing through beds of lotus and papyrus, blending sound, sight, and scent into a sensory hymn. You might be amused to learn that the Egyptians sometimes kept fish in these ponds, not just for beauty, but also for spiritual symbolism. Fish were associated with fertility and transformation, creatures that glided between worlds of air and water, much like your own meditation slips between consciousness and calm. Scholars still argue whether these fish were sacred pets or simply practical means of pest control, but either way, they added life to the tranquil water. Surrounding the pond, lotus flowers bloom proudly, each petal a delicate cup holding drops of water, reflecting the sky and sun. The lotus was no ordinary plant, it symbolized rebirth and purity, always emerging pristine from muddy waters. You feel a quiet awe at how this flower captures the essence of meditation itself, clarity and renewal emerging from chaos. Quirky fact: some researchers propose that certain water features were designed to produce subtle sound vibrations, enhancing the meditative atmosphere. The ancient Egyptians might have been early pioneers of what we'd call today sound therapy, turning flowing water into a natural white noise machine. You may notice small platforms or stone benches beside the water, inviting you to sit and lose yourself in the shimmering reflections. The pond's surface acts like a natural mirror, encouraging self-reflection both literally and metaphorically. Staring into the water, your thoughts ripple and settle, much like the surface disturbed and calmed by a gentle breeze. In addition to ponds, many gardens featured canals or narrow streams that mimicked the Nile's flow. These channels were sometimes fed by intricate irrigation systems, an engineering marvel that brought life to arid land and symbolized the garden's divine connection to the Nile's blessings. You might chuckle at the thought that these ancient waterworks were like early smart home technology designed to automate comfort and calm without a smartphone in sight. Historians still debate how widespread these water features were. Were they exclusive to royal gardens or common in more modest estates? The answer remains unclear, but the universal symbolism of water as a life force makes its presence a natural centerpiece in any meditation garden. So you sit by the pond, letting the cool air mix with the gentle sounds of water and bird calls. The scene is timeless: the water's smooth surface, the dance of lotus flowers, the soft splash of fish breaking the stillness, all working together to cradle your mind in a peaceful, flowing embrace. You rise from the tranquil pond and find yourself beneath a canopy of palms, their fronds gently swaying in the warm breeze like nature's slow motion fans. Shade was an essential feature in ancient Egyptian gardens, not just practical relief from the blazing sun, but a crucial element shaping the garden's atmosphere and your meditative experience. Think about it: the Egyptian sun was relentless, turning the world into a shimmering heat haze. So gardens were designed with a delicate balance of light and shadow, where palms, sycamores, and acacias created dappled retreats. These shaded spots invited you to slow your breathing, soften your gaze, and ease into a calm awareness. Shade was meditation's gentle partner, offering comfort without the isolation of darkness. Palms were more than just shade providers. They symbolized fertility, triumph, and eternal life. So standing beneath their fronds felt like a small celebration of the cycle of existence. The leaves themselves whispered softly in the breeze, creating a natural ASMR soundtrack that could lull your thoughts away from restless distractions. You might smile, imagining how these trees were the original white noise machines, long before apps made them trendy. Sometimes pergolas woven with reeds or palm branches extended the shade, creating intimate corridors within the garden. These sheltered walks guided your steps, fostering a sense of moving through a living tunnel of peace. You can almost feel the cool shadows and smell the faint earthiness of the palm leaves overhead, mingling with the scents of herbs and flowers nearby. Shade was also critical for preserving the garden's delicate plants, allowing blooms like lotus and jasmine to flourish without wilting. These microclimates within the garden enhanced the sensory layering. Cool air, filtered light, gentle rustling sounds that shaped your meditative state. Here's a quirky detail. Palm trunks were sometimes carved with symbols or small images, perhaps prayers or protective charms. You might chuckle at the thought that these trees were ancient mood boards, covered in graffiti from centuries past, all intended to bring blessings to those who rested beneath them. Historians still argue how much the shade was intentionally designed for spiritual effect versus purely for comfort. Maybe it was both, an elegant merging of utility and sacred atmosphere. After all, in Egypt, utility was rarely without symbolism, and every design choice was a subtle prayer. You might notice birds fluttering in and out of the shaded canopy, warblers and doves nesting among the leaves. These feathered visitors added gentle, Spontaneous melodies to the garden soundscape remind us that life here was a dynamic, breathing thing. Sitting beneath a palm, you feel a soft breeze teasing your hair, the sunlight playing peekaboo through the leaves. The cool shadows wrap you like a familiar blanket, and your mind drifts gently, carried by the murmurs of the garden's shaded groves. So, shade wasn't just an architectural detail. It was a vital sensory layer in the ancient Egyptian garden, a quiet guardian that softened the edges of your meditation, holding you in a tender balance between light and dark, warmth and cool, noise and silence. You continue your journey and find yourself drawn to the heart of the garden. The statues and sculptures, silent sentinels frozen in stone and wood, watching over the meditative space. These weren't mere decorations, they were powerful symbols and spiritual guardians, designed to focus your mind and deepen your connection with divine forces. Imagine walking slowly past a row of alabaster statues, each one carved with the serene face of a god or goddess, Isis, Osiris, Hathor, figures who represented life, death, rebirth, and protection. These figures were more than myth. They were embodiments of cosmic order, reminders that the garden was a sacred space linked to eternal cycles. You might find it amusing to think that these statues were the ancient Egyptian version of garden gnomes. Only instead of mischievous little men, you had solemn divine guardians silently watching your every thoughtful step. They lent the garden a sense of solemnity and calm, as if the gods themselves were gently encouraging your meditation. Some statues doubled as water features, spouting small streams into pools, merging the powers of art and nature. Imagine the soft trickle of water from a lion's mouth or a sphinx's paws, blending sound and symbol into a living ritual of renewal. Quirky fact in some gardens, small wooden figures called shabtis were buried in the soil beneath plants, thought to magically assist the garden's upkeep in the afterlife. It's like the Egyptians invented the idea of mystical garden gnomes, who worked when no one was looking. You may find it interesting that historians still debate how interactive these statues were meant to be. Were they purely symbolic, or did owners actively engage with them through offerings and prayers? The truth likely varies, but the presence of such sculptures undeniably shaped the atmosphere, giving weight and focus to your meditative walk. The materials chosen for these statues, limestone, sandstone, and sometimes precious metals, reflected their spiritual importance. You can almost feel the cool smoothness of stone under your fingertips and the weight of centuries of quiet reverence. These sculptures were often positioned to face the rising sun or align with specific celestial events, tying the garden's physical space to cosmic rhythms. You might smile thinking how the Egyptians aligned their gardens not only with earthly beauty, but with the grand bollet of stars and planets. Some statues were hidden among plants. Small surprises that invited a second glance, an intimate secret between the garden and its visitor. You might catch sight of a falcon, headed Horus peering from behind a papyrus stalk, reminding you that the garden was alive with symbolism waiting to be discovered. As you walk among these stone guardians, you feel a quiet energy, a mixture of reverence, peace, and a gentle challenge to open your mind beyond the material world. The statues turn the garden from a mere collection of plants and water into a sacred theater where meditation and myth perform their timeless dance. You keep wandering, and suddenly your fingers brush against something unexpected: fragrant herbs growing in neat, fragrant patches along the garden's edges. These weren't just for flavoring your bread or masking a questionable meal. They were carefully chosen plants, each with medicinal, spiritual, or calming properties, perfectly suited to support your meditation and well-being. Think of this: the Egyptian that stood that scent and touch could calm the restless mind, just like your favorite candle or lavender sachet does today. Herbs like mint, coriander, and frankincense were common in gardens, filling the air with gentle aromas that coaxed your thoughts into softness. You inhale deeply, the earthy scents weaving into your consciousness, subtly guiding you toward relaxation. Frankincense and myrrh, both precious resins, were burned to create incense smoke, believed to purify the air and invite divine presence. You might smile at the thought of this ancient aromatherapy. Centuries before spy trends made it cool again, the herbs had practical uses too. Mint was chewed for digestion, coriander for headaches, and thyme for wounds. This blend of utility and spirituality reflects the Egyptian worldview. There was no sharp line between body and soul, medicine and magic. Your meditative garden was a place to heal both flesh and spirit. Quirky tidbit: some gardens reportedly grew love herbs, thought to inspire passion and dreams. Imagine walking past a patch of these and wondering if your thoughts might suddenly turn to romance or mischief. Scholars still argue whether these plants were truly used for love spells or just folklore. You notice that many herbs were planted in raised beds or pots, arranged in geometric patterns that pleased both the eye and the mind. This orderliness echoed the Egyptian ideal of Mayat, a principle of harmony that governed the universe. Gardening itself became an act of creating cosmic balance. You might also find it interesting that some herbs were used as offerings to gods, carried in small baskets to temples, or burned in rituals within the garden. This practice blurred the line between daily life and sacred ceremony, turning every breath of scented air into a tiny prayer. Historians still debate whether the calming effect of garden herbs was fully understood or simply experienced as part of the overall meditative atmosphere. Probably both. Ancient gardeners knew instinctively that certain scents and textures helped slow racing thoughts and soothe the soul. As you walk through this fragrant patch, you find your steps slowing, your mind softening, carried on the subtle waves of scent and touch. The herbs become companions in your meditation, grounding you in the present and connecting you to the garden's layered history. You follow a winding path and come upon a low stone altar, its surface worn smooth by centuries of offerings and prayers. This altar isn't just a random fixture, it's a sacred focal point in the garden, a place where meditation and ritual intertwined seamlessly in ancient Egyptian practice. Imagine yourself kneeling before this altar, the warm sun on your skin, the scent of herbs and lotus mingling in the air. The altar was often adorned with small bowls of water, incense burners, and statues or images of gods, creating a concentrated space for reflection and communion with the divine. You might smirk, realizing that even thousands of years ago, people knew how to create a chill zone, where they could tune out distractions and get into the right headspace. The ancient Egyptians believed that such altars acted as conduits, linking the earthly realm to the divine world. The garden was not just a place to relax, it was a spiritual laboratory where meditation could open doors to cosmic understanding. The altar served as a bridge, inviting the god's presence into the physical space of the garden. You may find it amusing that sometimes offerings were as simple as bread or beer, humble gifts exchanged with the divine in hopes of blessing or protection. Scholars still argue whether these offerings were primarily symbolic or had a more practical social function, like reinforcing community bonds. Altars were usually positioned near water sources or under the shade of sacred trees, combining multiple meditative elements. This thoughtful placement amplified the altar's power, enveloping you in a layered sensory experience that deepened your focus. Some altars bore inscriptions of prayers or magical spells, their carved words glowing faintly in the sun. You can almost hear the whispered voices of ancient supplicants, their hopes and fears etched into stone, carried on the breeze. These inscriptions remind you that meditation here was never just about personal peace. It was a dialogue with forces greater than oneself. Curiously, some altars were portable, allowing meditation and ritual to move between garden spaces or even to other locations like temples or homes. This mobility suggests that the act of meditation was as much about intention and focus as about the physical setting. You might chuckle at the thought that these altars were early ancestors of today's meditation cushions and prayer mats, simple tools designed to carve out sacred time in a busy world. Despite millennia, the human quest for quiet focus and spiritual connection remains surprisingly unchanged. Historians still debate how widespread private meditation practices were, versus communal rituals centered around altars. The evidence hints that both existed, blending personal and social aspects of spirituality. Kneeling before the altar, you feel the weight of tradition and the lightness of possibility, suspended between earth and sky, past and present. The garden's sacred heart beats here, steady and silent, inviting you to lose yourself in quiet contemplation. You step beyond the altar and enter a section of the garden, where pathways curve gently between clusters of papyrus reeds and blue lotus flowers. This area feels quieter, almost secretive, designed to guide your mind inward as your feet follow the soft earth. Pathways in ancient Egyptian gardens weren't just practical routes, they were carefully planned journeys to deepen meditation and reflection. Picture yourself tracing these winding paths, the sun dappling through the leaves, the faint buzz of insects mingling with distant bird calls. The design encourages you to slow down, to notice the smallest details, the texture of a leaf, the play of light on water, the scent of a flower. Each step is an invitation to presence, an exercise in mindful walking centuries before mindfulness became a trendy buzzword. Pathways were often bordered with low hedges or flower beds, creating a sense of enclosure without full isolation. This balance gave you privacy to meditate, but also a gentle connection to the wider garden world. You might find it amusing to think of these paths as the ancient Egyptian version of a Zen labyrinth. Spaces meant to quiet the mind through gentle, repetitive movement. The materials for paths range from packed earth to smooth limestone slabs, depending on the garden's status and location. Some paths even incorporated symbolic shapes, spirals, zigzags, or alignments with cardinal points, adding layers of meaning to the physical act of walking. Historians still argue about how intentional these geometric patterns were, but their presence hints at a deep interplay between movement, space, and spirituality. You notice the occasional bench or low platform alongside the path, places designed for brief pauses or seated meditation. These resting spots often face the garden's most beautiful features: a reflective pool, a cluster of fragrant flowers, or a statue gazing toward the horizon, offering a visual anchor for your wandering thoughts. Quirky detail, some paths were lined with tiny carved stones or shells, thought to attract protective spirits or bring good luck. It's like a secret garden Easter egg hunt. But instead of chocolate, you find little blessings scattered underfoot. Walking these paths was a sensory ritual: the crunch of gravel, the rustle of papyrus, the warmth of sun-dappled stones beneath your feet. These sensations tethered you to the present moment, grounding your meditation in the tangible world. You may also realize that these pathways connected different garden zones, fruit orchards, sacred groves, water features, guiding your mind through a layered experience of nature, symbolism, and sacred space. The garden's layout encouraged a gentle exploration, a slow unfolding of awareness. Your footsteps become part of an ancient rhythm, a dance between earth and spirit designed to quiet the mind and open the heart. You step into a quieter nook where the soft buzz of bees mingles with the fragrance of blooming jasmine and lotus. This is the garden's sanctuary for silence, a deliberate absence of human noise, an activity designed to cradle your meditation in stillness. The ancient Egyptians understood that silence was not simply the absence of sound, but a sacred presence itself, an essential canvas for the mind's quiet to flourish. Imagine yourself settling onto a smooth stone bench, the warmth of the afternoon sun balanced by a gentle breeze. Here, the garden sounds, birdsong, water rippling, leaves rustling, fade softly into the background, making space for your thoughts to settle like fine sediment in a clear pond. This was a place crafted for inner listening, where the usual bustle of life was hushed to a whisper. You might find it curious that some areas were intentionally kept free from footsteps or even conversations, creating zones of sacred silence within the garden. Historians still debate whether this silence was enforced by ritual rules or simply cultivated by habit and respect for the meditative space. The placement of this silent zone often coincided with important spiritual landmarks, near sacred trees, altars, or pools, amplifying the sense of reverence. Here, every breath felt heavier with meaning, every exhale a release of worldly concerns. Quirky fact: certain plants like blue lotus were thought to induce a mild trance-like state, enhancing the experience of silence and meditation. You might chuckle, imagining how these natural relaxants were the original chill pills, long before modern pharmaceuticals. In this sanctuary, even the light seemed softened, filtered through dense foliage or reflected off still water, creating a dim, tranquil ambience. The play of shadow and light worked as a gentle meditation aid, drawing your attention inward. This silence wasn't about emptiness but fullness, a fullness of presence and awareness. The ancient Egyptians saw silence as a powerful connector, a bridge to the divine, where the garden's spirit could whisper truths beyond words. You notice how the garden's layout, its pools, trees, paths, statues, guided you naturally toward this quietude, as if the space itself invited your mind to still. It's a silent invitation to be fully here, fully now. As you breathe deeply in this peaceful pocket, the garden seems to hold its breath with you, a shared moment of stillness spanning millennia. The sacred silence hums softly, a reminder that sometimes the deepest meditation happens not in sound, but in the gentle hush between. The sun begins to dip low, and you find yourself nearing the garden's edge, where the scent of lotus and papyrus mingles with the soft evening breeze. This final stretch of your journey is where all the elements you've encountered, the water, the plants, the statues, the pathways, the altars, and the silence come together in a harmonious whole. The garden is no longer just a place but a living, breathing sanctuary of meditation and reflection. You might chuckle at how the ancient Egyptians basically designed the ultimate chill-out zone long before meditation apps and yoga studios made it trendy. Every detail, from the choice of plants to the placement of stones, was carefully calibrated to slow your heart, soften your thoughts, and open your spirit. At this golden hour, the garden's pools mirror the fiery sky, creating a doubling effect. Two worlds, earth and sky, intertwined. You pause, letting the sight settle deep inside you. A quiet reminder of life cycles and the promise of renewal. Quirky fact, some gardens featured moon pools. Shallow basins designed to capture the moon's reflection at night, adding a magical dimension to meditation after sunset. Imagine sitting by one, bathed in lunar glow, your mind drifting with the tides of time. Historians still debate how widely these moon pools were used and whether their spiritual significance was more poetic or ritualistic. As darkness gently falls, the garden seems to hum with a timeless energy, a subtle pulse that connects you with countless others who have walked these paths, knelt by these altars, and breathed in this sacred air. It's a thread weaving through history, binding past and present in quiet meditation. You realize the garden was more than a physical space. It was a practice, a philosophy, a way to bring order and peace into a chaotic world. Through the deliberate design of these spaces, the ancient Egyptians invited their minds to wander, their spirits to rest, and their hearts to open. And as you step out, carrying the garden's calm with you, you understand that meditation here was never about escaping reality. It was about embracing it, fully, deeply, with a quiet smile and an open heart. The sun's last light fades slowly, casting long shadows that soften the edges of the garden. The air cools, just enough to whisper comfort, as if the garden itself exhales after a long day. You feel the steady rhythm of your breath, slow and even, matching the quiet heartbeat of this ancient sanctuary. There is no rush here, no need to hurry or think too hard. The plants seem to sigh softly, leaves stirring in a delicate dance with the evening breeze. The water pools rest peacefully, mirrors of a sky that fades from gold to deep indigo. You feel tucked into this moment, suspended in a gentle calm that stretches beyond time. Meditation in this garden was never about perfection or silence without thought. It was about presence, being here, now, in this fleeting breath between past and future. It was a place where the noise of the world softened into a distant murmur, and your mind found room to simply be. Imagine carrying this quiet with you as you drift towards sleep. The softness of lotus petals, the cool touch of water, the watchful calm of stone guardians. These images settle gently, like a lullaby sung by the earth itself. And now, as your eyelids grow heavy and your thoughts slow to a whisper, remember this garden, its harmony, its grace, its invitation to rest. Let it carry you softly into dreams, where the ancient and the eternal meet. Sleep well, and until next time, let your mind wander peacefully through gardens of calm. End of script. Sweet dreams.